Okay, we're going to look at animating a series of Illustrator layers again. So we've got an Illustrator document here with a series of layers. So again, it's just really important to name your layers, keep all the key elements that you want to animate separately on separate layers before you import them into After Effects, so you're staying organised. So we have a document here, it's called Operating 1. If you download it from Teams, save it into a folder called More Animating Layers, open After Effects, save the project, create a project, save it as More Animating Layers in the same folder as this Operating 1 document. So if I now switch to After Effects, so like I said, I've created my document here, my project should I say, and now I can import the Illustrator document in. So again, if I right click and import and file, okay, so here's the Illustrator document. Now I'm going to import this in a slightly different way just to show you another feature here. So if I just keep that as footage, don't click create composition and import it in. So what After Effects does is it recognises that it is an Illustrator document. So if I just set this to composition and then set to layer size, it will still import those layers in as separate layers. Okay. So if I OK that, you'll see that they're here in a folder separately. It's created a composition for me. If I double click on the composition here, again it will appear in the timeline. Okay, now again, like we've done before, if we just have a look at the composition settings, so if I right click on the composition here, go to settings, at the moment it's just checking what it's set to. Now initially it was set to a shorter duration than this, and yours will be. So just change the, well basically it'd be set to the duration of the previous project that we did, which was I think it was actually 10 seconds, but if not, you can double check. If it isn't 10 seconds, type in 1000. If we change the width and the height to 750 by 500, which are the settings for a GIF, an animated GIF that could appear on a website. So again, you can adjust this depending on the project itself. But if we go for 750, 500, and then the 10-second duration. Okay. Now what you might need to do, if your project was less than 10 seconds, you might need to just zoom out and just extend your layers here by clicking and dragging them like this until they fill the 10 seconds of the entire project. Okay, so if for any reason your project wasn't initially set to 10 seconds, you just need to extend the actual layers themselves up to the 10-second point at the end of the project. Okay, so just level with the 10 seconds. Okay, so I want to add a coloured background in here. At the moment we've just got the default black background, so if I right click here and go to new solid and then choose a colour, I think I'm going to go for a kind of a darker green, and OK that. Okay, you'll see that again that covers and obscures all the layers underneath, so again drag to the bottom. Okay, and then we've got our coloured background. Then finally I just want to lock the layer. Okay, and then we're ready to move on to the next stage. Okay, just one minor thing, the composition settings, just realised it was actually set to 25. I think just make sure if it's set to 25, we're going to switch to 24 frames a second, become apparent why in a minute, then OK that. So we're going to move the, we can zoom in on the timeline window by pressing the plus key. Okay, and then we want to move the playhead to 12F for 12 frames, so the 12th frame. Okay, and then we're going to start by animating these first two layers here. If we shift click to select them both, And then if you remember, a shortcut for position is to press P. So if you press P, we'll see the position set property for both. Then if you click on the timer for both, that will insert a keyframe for both. So I'll do that again. So just make sure the timer is selected there, it turns blue, and that will insert a keyframe for both at 12 frames. Okay, and then if we move the playhead back to the beginning, back to 0, we're going to animate the figure here and the plant, and they're going to start off stage. So bear in mind we're at 0 here, start the animation. If you shift drag to drag them in a straight line off the stage. Okay, and there we go, that automatically creates a keyframe for both. Then if we just scrub in the needle, you'll see that both animate in. It's a nice simple horizontal animation in. Okay, so if we move down to the arrow layer and again press P. Okay, but this time we're also going to change the scale property. So if we hold down Shift S to also show the scale, move to 12 frames. Okay, press the stopwatch next to position to create a keyframe, and also next to scale. Okay, and then if we move the needle back to 0, okay, and once we're back at 0, we're going to change the position. So we're going to drag the, excuse me, just zoom in a bit. We're going to click and drag and change the position of the arrow. Just be careful I don't. There we go, so we'll drag it off bottom right. Okay, and you'll see that's animated the position of the arrow. Okay, now looking at the scale property of the arrow, what we want to do is we want to just move the playhead incrementally by a frame at a time. Now to do this, if you press page up, it will move back towards 0. If you press page down, it will move away from 0. So we want to press page down twice to just move it 2 frames. Okay, and then at this point we're going to change the scale. So if we click on the scale, we're going to change it to 60. So just type in 60 and enter, and then again page down twice, and we're going to change it up to 120. Okay, and then finally 2 more page downs, so 2 more frames, and we're going to change it back to what it was, which was 100. Okay, and then if I just scrub the needle back there, you'll see that simulates a little kind of mouse click animation that you get when you click on something. Okay, so you can see, I'll just click off that actually. So you can see there that little click animation on the cursor on the arrow. Okay, just to constrain the work area a bit, as we've done previously, I'm going to move the playhead to 1.1 second and 12 frames here. Okay, and then I just want to reduce the work area down to there. So if I now press N, you'll see that the work area immediately jumps to that point. Okay, so we can zoom in a bit on that area, pressing the plus key, and then we've got more focused attention on that area. And again, if I test now, it won't play all the way to the end, it'll just loop that little bit, and we can get more of a sense of how that section of the animation is going to play out. Okay, so that's really useful. Okay, now we're going to animate this box around the first object here. So we're going to animate it by scaling it. So if we select the box layer, press S, we need to select the anchor point here in the center. If you press Y, that will select the anchor point tool, and then if we drag and then hold down Shift, we can constrain the drag to bottom center of the box there. Okay, now if we move the playhead to 12 frames, okay, click on the scale timer to set a keyframe there, move the playhead back to 0, change the scale to 0, that will automatically create a keyframe at 0, and then we have created a little animation which scales up from that anchor point bottom center. Okay, now we want to reuse this animation, this box animation, over these 2 objects here. So rather than redoing the whole process again, what we can do is we can duplicate these layers. So if I select the box layer, press Ctrl D twice, you can see we've duplicated the layers. And if I also just shift click on all three layers and press U, you will see that we have that animation duplicated, that box animation duplicated on each of the layers. But what we want to do is actually move the animation. So on box 2, I'm just going to start to drag the box here, the duplicated box. Make sure I'm on box 2. Now if you try and drag like I've just done and it won't drag, it's probably because you've not switched back to the selection tool from the anchor point tool. Easy mistake to make. So make sure you go back to the selection tool, start to drag the box. And again, another thing to check here is, because these are all easy mistakes to make, that you haven't selected more than one layer. Make sure it's just box 2, the box 2 layer that's selected. Okay, mouse over the box, start to drag, hold down shift, and then you can drag that over the center object, and then repeat that with box 3. Again, just clicking on box 3, making sure it's just box 3 selected. Start to drag, hold down shift, and drag that final third box over the third object. And then you'll see that that's duplicated that animation for all 3 layers. Okay, now we want to move on to animate another 3 layers with different objects on. So the layers with these 3 objects on. So stop, robot and pair. So if you shift click on all 3, okay, and then if we just make sure we're at 12F on the timeline, press S, and that will show us the scale properties for all 3. Click on the timer for the scale property for just one of them, and it will again apply to all 3 because all 3 layers are selected. Okay, now if you move the playhead back to 0, and again you've still got all 3 layers selected, change scale to 0 on one of them and it will apply that to all 3. So again, this is a good practical time saving technique. And then if we just scrub the needle, you see that it's animated all 3 in sync. Okay, now if we go to the start layer, okay, we're going to just apply a scale here as well. So if you press S, okay, move to 12 frames, 12F. If here, what I want to do is I'm just going to create a little kind of bump really, and change the percentage to 110, and that will automatically create a keyframe. Sorry, I need to select the scale timer. That will create a keyframe at 110. Move the playhead back to 0, change the percentage to 0. Okay, that will automatically create a keyframe now the scale's turned on. And then finally, if I go back to 12F, use page down to move 2 frames forward from there, and this is the kind of bump I'm talking about. And then I'm going to change it back to 100. So you'll see, press enter to apply, you'll see that we've got this little bump going from 0, scaling up to 100, and then, 110, and then down to 100. So if I just press spacebar to play that through, you see it's just very subtle, but has a nice effect. Okay, now we're going to go to the board layer. So if we go down to the board layer, okay, press P for position, move to 12 frames, select P to insert a keyframe, move back to 0, and click and drag, hold down shift and move the board up. You can zoom out if you want. I tend to find it easier to zoom out and see where I'm dragging it to. Okay, and there you've created a simple movement of the board. Okay, and then down to the floor, we're going to adjust the transparency, so press T for transparency. Okay, to 12 frames. turn the timer on, insert a keyframe at 100%, play it back to 0, opacity down to 0. Okay, and there we have a simple. So I think we're getting reasonably well practiced at this now. You can see the floor just fading there, or fading in, should I say. Okay, now we're going to look at the gear layers. So we're going to apply transformation to all three. So if we shift click on gear 1 and then gear 3, that selects all three. We want to access the rotation property, so if we press R, that will access the rotation for all three. Play ahead to 12 frames. Okay, we're going to select the rotation. We select on 1, it selects on all three, inserts a keyframe. Play ahead to 0. Now we're going to change the rotation to 90 degrees clockwise for the gear 1, and that will apply to all three. We want 90 degrees clockwise for gear 1 and gear 2, but I'm going to adjust gear 1 and gear 3. I'm going to adjust to gear 2, so I'm just going to type in -90 for that one, so that will move. Sorry, I need to deselect the others before I do that. So just click away and then click back on gear 2, so we're sure that it's just gear 2 that's selected, and then select the rotation, type in -90, and then that will apply -90 to that gear. So if we just scrub the needle for that, you'll see that the gear 1 and gear 2 are moving in sorry, should I say they're in an anti-clockwise direction, and gear 2 is in a clockwise. Yeah, so just to reiterate on that, +90 is in an anti-clockwise direction, -90 is in a clockwise direction. Okay, so we're practicing working with multiple layers here. If we now go down to the background layer, let me just drag up the layer panel a bit so we can see that more clearly. Down to the background layer, so if I select that, and then, in fact, I'm just going to compress some of these other layers, I think, so we can just focus a bit more on the particular layer. There we go, just compressed a few to bring it up. So we go to the background layer, we're going to again modify scale and transparency. So press S, and then if we hold down Shift and press T, that will ensure that both properties are visible. If we move to 12 frames again, so, and then select S and T. Okay, play it to 0, so it should be becoming fairly familiar now, this process. Scale to 0, opacity to 0. Okay, so we're scaling up to 100% and we're scaling opacity to 100% over that first 12 frames. Okay, final thing, decided it'd probably be good to scale gears 1, 2 and 3 as well as rotate them in line with the scale of the rest of the background. So again, we can go back to these, we can shift click to select all three, press S to access the scale properties for all three, move to 12 frames, again select the timer, that will apply to all three, set it 100% at 12 frames, play head back to 0, and again with all the timers selected we can just change scale back down to 0, and that applies that to all three layers. So at 0 frames, setting the scale to 0, and then you'll see that that's scaled in like the rest of the background, so they're scaling and rotating. Okay, so that's our web page. Okay, so for this final bit we're going to look at, if you remember, that's the important next stage once we've animated is to then sequence over time, finalize it and tweak the timings. Okay, so we're going to compress all the layers first of all. So if shift click on the top layer. I'll do that again. Click on the top layer, shift click on the lower layer, or you can click on the top layer, press Ctrl A, and that selects them all. And then I'm just going to compress that top layer, which will compress them all. Okay. Okay, so if we look at our work area here, I'm just going to extend that a little bit to 212. Okay, so I'm just going to drag that out to 212. Okay, and then with all these layers still selected, I'm going to click on one, which will select all, drag those towards the end. So we're ready now to start sequencing. Okay, so now we can start to sequence. So I'm going to start with the floor, so just click off the layers to deselect, select the floor layer. So I'm going to drag that in towards the beginning. Okay, and then just off the beginning. Then I'm going to select the board layer and bring that in so it starts just after the floor layer. So you can see we're beginning this process of sequencing. So the floor's coming in, fading in, and then the board. Okay, so we're going to continue sequencing. So if I select the character and the plant now, they're going to come in together from either side. So I'm going to bring those in again. They're going to start just after the two layers I've already sequenced. Then I'm going to come on to the boxes. So if we shift click to select the three boxes, and again I'll bring those in to a point where they begin just after the character and plant. But what I want to do, I think when I look at this, I just want to speed up the boxes a bit. I think they're a little bit slow. So what I can do is I can access their keyframes. So if I press S, you'll see I can access the scale properties here. So that's the animation I put on it earlier. So if I want that to happen a bit more quickly, I can shift click on the three final keyframes, and if you remember, if I shorten the distance between those two keyframes, that has the effect of speeding that animation up. So if I just scrub that or press spacebar to play, yeah, I'm a bit happy with that. I think that's a more suitable speed. Okay, so I think I'm going to put in, when these boxes appear, just a little kind of bump jolt as they appear, like we did with the arrow previously. So I'm going to change that scale property to 110, and remember, with all three selected, that will apply to all three. And then if you remember, if we press page down, we can move one frame at a time. So I'm going to press page down once, just move on one frame. Then I'm going to change the scale to 90, down to 90, and again that will insert the keyframe and apply to all three. And then page down again, just for once, and change the scale to 100, and again that will apply to all three. So you can see that just gives us a little kind of bump as they scale up into position. So again, I can just scrub to see how that plays out. That seems to play out okay. Everything's kind of coordinated and sequenced okay. I'm reasonably happy with that. The board appears and then the boxes scale up and bump, so that's fine. Okay, so if we move on to the stop, robot and pair, so again we can shift click to select all three. So again I'm going to sequence those. I'm going to drag the layers in. So I mean, I can see a little preview as I drag them. See, I'm kind of dragging them over the playhead there. So again I can scrub the needle to see if I'm happy with that. That doesn't look too bad. Make sure that's coming in at the right time. Yep, so they're coming in just after the bump of the squares. But I think what I'd like to do is just speed up their scale as well. So I'm going to press S and access their scale properties, and then I'm going to shift click on the three final keyframes, and like we did with the boxes, I'm just going to bring those in to speed the appearance of those objects up a bit. So again, you can press spacebar to play that. Okay, and that looks reasonably okay. Fairly happy with that, reasonably dynamic. Okay, so I'm now going to turn my attention to the start and the arrow. Now I want to deal with these together, so I'm just going to drag the start up so it's next to the arrow layer. So we've got the two layers together there. I'm going to shift click on both and position them roughly in sequence where I want them. Okay, so if I just scrub that, that's looking okay. Maybe just back a bit so they appear after the objects. That's okay. But I think I want it so the start will appear first, so I'm just going to drag the arrow layer back a little bit, and then we've got the start just appearing ahead of it. There we go, and then the arrow coming in. So that's looking okay. Okay, so I'm just going to access the keyframes on the start layer as well. So if I press S here, and you can see we created that little kind of bump animation at the end. So I need to select both the keyframes for the bump, bring those in. I just want to speed the start up a little bit as well. It's just looking a little bit slow at the minute. So that's looking a bit more dynamic. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with the arrow. So I'm just going to select that, press S, and again you can see the bump keyframes here. So I'm going to shift select those and just bring those in a bit so that appears just after the start animation finishes. Maybe a bit sooner. Okay. Can also access the position there. So if I press Shift P, and I can actually bring in the position. So I need to adjust that too. So we've got the position changing and then the bump. So it's important, actually, an important point, that if you've got more than one property animated, you need to make sure you show them both. The best way to ensure you do that is to select the layer and press U, and then that will show all the animated properties for that layer. So that's actually an important point, animating the two properties together. So I'm animating the position and the scale, this scale where we've created the bump together. So we've got the movement in and then the bump happens. So I think that's looking okay. I know my window's a bit small here. Let me just expand that bit, zoom in a bit. Let's just use the spacebar to play that through. Yeah, okay, that's looking pretty good now. Just one more time. Yeah, reasonably happy with that. Might just slow the arrow down a little bit. So I need to align the bump with that. Okay, so I hope it's apparent what I'm doing here, animating the position and the scale of the arrow at the same time, so that they are sequenced together. Okay, so just to have a look at how we can start fine-tuning some of the properties as well on these keyframes if we want to alter those. So if we go to the start layer, okay, and if we go to the third keyframe, I'm going to change that to 80% here on the scale. So on the start layer, I'm going to change that down to 80. Sorry, let me move the playhead along to it too. On the start layer, sorry, I'm getting my layers mixed up here. So on this keyframe here, the third keyframe on the start layer, I'm going to change that down to 80. Okay, then I'm going to press page down to move along one keyframe, and then I'm going to change it back up to 100. So I'm just adding an additional keyframe there. Just an interesting point, well, an important point here. What you can do is you can unlink the scale here. So you see the little chain link icon. If I unlink here, then I can change the X and Y scale independently of one another. So I could change the Y to 80, and that would have the effect of kind of slightly squashing the start button there. I'm not going to do that at the moment, but it is an option. Okay, so we want to bring in the gears layers now. Sometimes if you just Control A and then compress all the layers, it can just make it easier. So if we just go shift click to deselect, and then if we go to the 3 gears layers, now if we press U, that will, if you remember, that will show us all the animated properties for those 2 layers. So to sequence those, now we want those just to come in just after the mouse click. So if we move the playhead to where the mouse click is, which is here, so yeah, we want them to appear just as the click happens really. So if I align those with the playhead there, then that looks about right in terms of timing. Mouse click, gears appear. Again, just accessing the animated properties here, I just want to adjust the duration of the animation. I'm going to shorten it a bit to speed it up. Again, if we play through, okay, it's not too bad. Maybe slow down a little bit. Just compress those, the gears layers, move on to the background layer, and I want that to come in at approximately the same time as the gears. Gears slightly ahead. Okay, so just thinking about the gears here, I've started rotating them, but they only rotate briefly. What I'd like them to do is to continue rotating. So to do that, I can apply an effect called rotate over time. So if I shift click on the 3 gears layers here to ensure they're selected, if I go over to effects and presets and search for over time, and the one we're looking for is rotate over time. So if I click on that effect and drag it over each of the gears individually, that will apply that effect to each of those. Okay, if I just extend the play area a bit here, just so we can see this rotation over a bit of a slightly longer time. Just zoom out a bit on the play area. So if I just test that, you'll see that the rotation of the gears is a bit too slow. Okay, so what we can do is we can access the properties on the left hand side, the effect control properties here, and we can change. If you look here where it says rotation degrees per second, it's at 10 at the moment. If we increase that to 90, okay, and then if we test that out, and that's just applied to one of the cogs at the moment, but that's looking okay, this cog here. So yeah, we're okay with that. So we can apply that to the other cogs now. So if you remember, to access these properties, these are applied to each of these layers. So if I now go to gear number 2 and change that to 90, and then gear number 3, the same, and then test again. Okay, that should be about the right speed now. Yep, so that's looking a lot better. So happy with that. Okay, so happy with that. Now we can actually add in motion blur, which is a really nice little effect we can add in that really adds a sense of realism to the movement. This blurring that you get when anything moves, and if so we can just click and drag that, apply that to all the layers. Press spacebar to place it through. You can see it adds that nice sense of realism to the movement. Okay, so happy with that, reasonably happy. Leave it to you now. You can experiment with some of these animations, and I think some experimentation, particularly on tweaking the keyframes, and just adjusting those fine timings of the movement. Okay. Quick audio test, quick audio test.